I'm a television writer mostly, have been known to write film occasionally, and I'm probably best known for Wolfblood, the children's TV series.
Get back inside!
I was planning to go into directing for theatre, and discovered quite quickly I was really very bad at directing. But what I was enjoying was working with actors and also writing and adapting stuff to direct. So that kind of steered me off into writing, really. I'd always sort of fiddled around with writing. I'd written a few short stories that were published. I had a novel published fairly early on. I got in touch with the Writersroom, I think, fairly early, just by sending things in quite early in my career, and had occasional contact with them. I was invited on a couple of workshops, that kind of thing, attended days that they did for writers. So I'd had quite a bit of contact with Writersroom. And then, of course, they were involved in the generation of Wolfblood, because I sent Wolfblood into a Writersroom call for children's scripts. And that was basically how it was developed from that point. So the Writersroom are largely to credit, I think, for Wolfblood being discovered and made. Foz Allen was our producer on the show. He came in fairly late in the development process once we'd sort of pinned the whole thing down, and we had, I think, a couple of episodes written at that stage. So this was when we'd been greenlit for production and we knew the show was going ahead. So from that point he was working very closely with myself and the script editor, Jonathan Wolfman, to create the first series, basically. So it was moving from that process of what is the show to, you know, what are the episodes, if you like. So obviously, as a writer, you know, you kind of know what you want, but you don't always know how to get to it. And that, I think, is what script editors and producers are for. They're helping you to find the best way to tell the story that you want to tell. Wolfblood kind of came about in a really interesting way. It came to me quite quickly. I was actually in a second-hand bookshop looking at a shelf of books, and my eye sort of skipped from the title of one book to the title of another and put two words together and came up with Wolfblood. And I thought, that's interesting. What is a wolfblood? Well, I guess it's kind of like a werewolf, but what if it wasn't like a traditional werewolf? And the idea really came sort of all in a rush from that one event. But having said that, I mean, it has its background in the kinds of things I'm interested in. I've always been a big reader of science fiction and fantasy, and to some extent horror. Writing for science fiction, fantasy, horror, anything in that kind of area has its own challenges, because you have to do all of the stuff you would do for any other genre. You have to create good characters, you have to have good stories and all of those things, but you're also creating a world that's often just sort of 5 degrees off the real world. So you have to create your own rules for it. So one of the first things I did with Wolfblood was to sit down and think, well, what are the rules of this world? One of the great frustrations about the traditional werewolf story is they only change once a month. And I thought, well, that's got to go out of the window, because you can't do that. You know, is it a full moon every episode, or do they just spend episodes and episodes not changing? So obviously that was one of the rules that had to change for practical reasons. Werewolf stories, I suppose, have always been traditionally very, very negative. It's a curse, it's something that happens to you, it's something terrible in many ways. And I wasn't really interested in doing that again. I always said when we were developing the idea that in a way it's not a werewolf story, it's a superhero story. It's a story about kids who have these amazing powers, one of which is turning into wolves, but they also have, you know, amazing strength and ability to run and sense of smell and sight and all of those kind of wolf-related things. So we were always treating it very much as this sort of superhero story. Family is a very big thing in Wolfblood, I think partly because it's very big for our audience. One of the things that's always come up in talking to CBBC is that children of this age group are interested in family, they're interested in school, they're interested in the world immediately around them, and any show for that age group has to reflect that. But it also felt to me that one of the things I'd never seen in a werewolf story before was the idea of a wolf pack, of a family, of a group of people interacting, as you tend to see lone individuals in werewolf stories. So I was really interested in looking into the idea of how would a wolf pack function. It then becomes a metaphor for things like puberty, for growing up and discovering your own identity, how you interact with your family and how you separate yourself from your family. In the third series, we're starting to talk about them coming towards the end of their school life and looking towards the future, and how does that affect the group and the nuclear family. We've kind of dealt with all the issues of hiding the secret, people finding out. So going into season 3 was actually quite interesting. We had to find really a new overarching story for the season. And what we've done, I suppose, is to expand it out, sort of beyond the boundaries of Stony Bridge and this small community. It's a question of balancing what you really, really want to write with what you feel you can sell and what can get made. I mean, obviously, I've always been a science fiction writer, a fantasy writer. My instincts are towards big, potentially expensive stories. But Wolfblood kind of gave me a chance to tell those kinds of stories on a manageable budget in a way that would appeal to a certain target audience. Look for that one really good idea, because I think that there's always a temptation when you're a beginning writer to sort of rush your work out there and show it to people. But look for that one idea that, you know, encapsulates the kind of things you want to do. Because I think one of the great things about Wolfblood, it kind of sets out my brand in a way. It says I am this kind of writer, and that's been really quite useful.